Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Brian David Johnson. And he's here today to share with us his new book, The Future You. Break through the fear and build the life you want. So does thinking about tomorrow make you anxious? For many people, that's exactly the case. The future is Brian David Johnson's business. He is a professor of practice at the Arizona State University School for the Future of Innovation in Society and a Futurist and Fellow at Frost Sullivan. From 2009 to 2016, he was Intel Corporation's first ever futurist. Brian has more than 40 patents and has been published in many consumer and trade publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Slate, and often appears on Bloomberg TV, PBS, Fox News, and the Discovery Channel. So let's welcome to the show, Brian David Johnson.
It's great to be here, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, Marianne, I'm a futurist, and so I've spent the last 25 years working with organizations and individuals, working with them to see their future, and then figure out what steps they need to take to get there. And I've spent most of my time doing this with large corporations or governments or the military. But over the years, lots of people have kind of pulled me aside and asked kind of for personal advice. And I would tell them, I don't really know your future, but here's how I think about it. Here's how I think like a futurist. And after so many years of people asking me, I thought it'd be a good time to write it down.
So what exactly is a futurist?
Well, as a futurist, I work with people to generally look at the future of their business, look at the future of the national security, and basically go and figure out not only what the future could look like, but what are the steps people need to take today, tomorrow, 5 years from now to move towards that future and move away from the negative future. Probably the best example, Marianne, is I was the chief futurist at the Intel Corporation, which is the chip company that goes into our computers and our devices. And it takes them 10 years to design, develop, and deploy a chip. So they needed to know 10 years before what people would want to do with technology. And that was my job. I'm an engineer and a designer by training. I'm basically a big nerd. And so I would kind of write that specification because there was a real business need for it.
So when you look at a futurist writing a self-help book, what was in your brain that you're like, hey, this is something that everyone needs to know?
Well, ultimately, what I'm trying to do is empower people. I think oftentimes when people think about the future, and especially these days, they feel that they don't have power. They feel like they don't have the ability to shape their future. And after doing this for so long, I've seen it happen time and time again. I've seen organizations and companies and people actually imagine, design, and build a different future. And so I wanted to write it down so that anybody, if they didn't feel empowered, that they could kind of pick this up and say, all right, here's some simple steps that you can follow, not only to kind of envision that future you, but then just say, okay, what can you start doing right away to move towards that?
It's empowering. Now, do you have an example? Because I can really easily see how people take the negative and just incorporate that into their future or what the future potential of a business or corporation could be. So how do you have an example of how they can look at things a little differently?
Well, generally, I tell people that the hardest question to answer is, what do you want the future you to look like? Most people spend our lives, if you just think there's a future you and there's a present you and there's a past you, most people spend our lives thinking about the past you. They think about decisions they've made, they worry about the decisions that they made, and they spend most of their time kind of anchored to the past. And so what I've tried to do with people is to say, okay, well, how can you imagine that future you and who do you want it to be? And I ask people to get really specific, to say, okay, write it down. Again, I am a professor. And so I get people to say, write it down. Tell me what a day in the life would be like. The details are really important. What would it smell like? What would it look like? Where would you live? And really getting people to get that story written down and then to start telling that story to other people. And that's one of the most empowering things to do, because these stories are how we communicate with people. And then that's what really starts you down that path, is really kind of figuring out what that future is and then starting to tell that story not only to yourself, but then to other people.
In your book, you talk about how the future is not fixed. And I would love for you to share and expand on that for our listeners, because when I was reading it, it kind of made my head hurt a little bit.
Well, yeah. So the future is not some fixed point that we're all running to, helpless to do anything about. In the book, I joke that, oftentimes even the way people talk about the future, the grammar and the vocabulary we use is completely wrong. We sort of talk about the future as if it's this destination that we're all going towards. I like to joke. People say, they treat the future like it's Des Moines, Iowa, right? And that we're all going to Des Moines, Iowa. And so everybody wants to know, how do you prepare for where we're going? What's it going to be like when we get there? And again, I love Des Moines, Iowa. I do a lot of work in the future of agriculture, but we're all not going to the same place. You might want to go to Seattle, Washington, or you might want to go to Austin, Texas. That you have the ability to begin to pick that future and where you want to go. And that future is so local that the future doesn't happen in some distant city. It doesn't happen way away from you. The future actually happens where you are. And so understanding that the future is local and that the future will happen right here, I think gives people a way really to start thinking about, okay, where is their place in that future? Or, quite honestly, the future you might live someplace else. And I like to joke with my students, if you want to be a lumberjack, you have to move to the forest. And so oftentimes you can begin to think about not only the future isn't fixed, but where is your future?
Do you find that people get a little hung up on being able to create their own future, and that your book and what you're teaching them is helping people to understand and see things on a broader scale?
Yeah, that was my hope, was number one, to give people just the tools. So a way of thinking, really, Marianne, the permission to say, you can build your future. Let me show you how. I don't know your future. As a futurist, I would never be so arrogant as to say, I know your future. Only you can know your future. But what I can give you is the kind of simple tools to start going there, but then also tell some stories. Tell stories over the years of the people who have really humbled me by asking me questions and watching them build their future and actually move towards that future you.
What has been one of the most profound examples that you've worked with in a future change that you can share with us that isn't classified?
Well, I'll tell you, and this is one of the stories that I tell in the book, is there was a young woman that I was doing some work with that had really hit rock bottom, had hit some really tough financial times, honestly had some mental health issues, real world stuff, hard stuff, stuff that, people really feel like, if I can't make my rent, they say, okay, futurist, I can't make my rent, and you're telling me I need to go and build my future. And what I tried to do with her was really start taking those steps to say, okay, well, let's focus on what you have control over. Let's focus on, bodily, are you safe? And start building up, start laddering up. What do you have control over? What small steps that you can take? And turns out, as we were talking, the future for her really was about going back to school and was about really being able to rebuild her life. And just the act of seeing herself in a local community college or a local school, and just the act of going to the website, the act of making the phone call, because there are people at that college that it's their job to help you. And just to go to her and say, you can even take those mental steps of her just beginning to tell that story, allowed her to get out in front of the financial problems, get out in front of that, and start taking those steps. And it made her feel more powerful. So those little everyday steps, the really hard everyday steps we have to go through, didn't feel so insurmountable anymore.
Oh my goodness, how empowering is that? And it makes a huge difference. And it sounds like it shifts in perspective, and really looking at the world in a new way.
Definitely. You can see the spark in people's eyes. This is one of the things that really, Marianne, just makes me so excited. And that's one of the things that really that gave me the passion to write the book was you can see the light go on in people's eyes when all of a sudden they get that agency and they feel that power of being able to say, yes, I can actually do this. And also to understand that, you don't have to get it right the first time, right? That the future is in motion. It's not fixed, right? So it's not a single point. And you get to change your mind. And as you go out and start to talk to people about your future, start finding the tools that can help you move towards that future, even finding the experts, the people who have kind of done it before, and you tell them that story of the future you might learn that that future you that you thought you might want to change it a little bit. There's a story I tell in the book of Maddox, who was this incredibly brilliant scientist, and we were talking about him, and he really wanted a place to live, and he was kind of talking about how to go about that, and had this vision for him and his family. And then he went out and he started down that path, and he came back to me and realized that he hated grass. That as he was thinking about his future, he always thought, he had the perfect suburban home with the lawn and all of that. And he actually went and sort of rented a place and then learned that he just hated grass. And so he shifted to his future you and ended up getting a condo for him and his family.
Oh my gosh, the silly little things like that, but they make such a huge difference in a person's life. I mean, if you hate grass, chances are mowing it's going to be just horrible,
Exactly. That his dream, right? That dream that we all have as he started to move towards it. And that again is that living in that dream, much like the young woman who was looking at the college, and definitely for Maddox, as he even started house hunting and started sort of thinking and having these conversations, all these things you can just do. They don't cost money. It's about your time and about what you do and where you focus your energy, and focusing that energy on the future and not on the fear and the regret of the past. That really can help propel you forward.
So are there other things that kind of hold people back other than the fear and the regret of the past, or are those the two main things?
I think that's the place to start. Well, I go through the book, and as you know, Marianne, I do a lot of debunking of the future, where I tell people, beware of predictions and people who make them, because why are they making them, and what are they trying to get you to do? And there's other things where, like, about technology. Oftentimes, myself, as we talked before, I am a technologist. I'm an engineer and a self-professed nerd and geek, but I always tell people that people think about technology. One of the things that we always think about is, technology is changing us, and technology is, ruining my kids' education, or technology is sort of taking my job. And I try to tell people that technology doesn't get to decide. Humans get to decide. Actually, a technology is just a tool. And by actually even thinking of it that way, you are giving up your power again. You're giving up your ability, and to understand that, technology is just a tool. A hammer is just a hammer. It's ultimately about the effect that it can have on your life, and you sort of taking back that control.
So how would someone use this information of being a futurist in their business life? Let's say they're looking to redesign, maybe they've lost their job and looking to redesign themselves.
And that's one of the kind of foundational stories in the book. Was a woman that I'd worked with who was going through a career change, rethinking herself, rethinking her career, rethinking her business. And this is where it can also become really powerful, because that story of that future you, and really thinking about, well, what do you want to do? And what do you want to do with your time? And how do you find the people? How do you find your team that's going to help you move towards that future you? And telling them that story of this future career or this future business, it also helps you root out those toxic people. And we all know those types of people, right? These are the people who don't give you energy, who take away your energy. And by telling them that future, if they start to tear you down, it's a good way to get away from them as quickly as possible. And then starting to find those tools. And this is a part of the process. The tools are things like not only technology, but also trade associations, or things like, quite honestly, Marianne, this podcast. All these different tools out there to help you sort of envision that future you and get there. And then those experts. And really in business, this is where it becomes really powerful around networking, because if you go to people and say, this is my future career change, or this is the future business I want, and these are people who have done it before, I think people are really surprised at how giving these experts can be. People who have been down this road before and can give of their experience and help you get there. And it's a way of not only helping to refine that vision for your future, but also it's one heck of a great way to do networking. But then also in the book, we use the process as a way to say, okay, well, once you've defined this future you, this future business or future career, all right, let's turn around and do some backcasting is what it's called, to say, okay, if this is where you want to go, let's think about how you get there. And what's the thing that will show that you're halfway to this future, whether it could be a job interview, it could be a degree, it could be a shift or a membership in something. So, okay, that gets you halfway. Okay, that's the farther out goal. Well, now split that in half again. Well, what'll get you partway? What'll be that thing that'll show that you're moving in the right direction? You're just getting started, but it makes it more accomplishable to feel that you're moving towards that halfway point. And then we half it again and say, what do you do Monday? What is the thing that you can wake up on Monday and start doing? What is that internet search that you can do? What is that sitting down and just started writing out what that future is? And very quickly you see that the barriers between you and that future become really simple, that you can really get started and take those simple steps. As we talked earlier, that just going out and looking at the degree programs at the local community college or the local college, or looking at other people who have done this before and writing down that list of possible experts, are ways that you can really start to carve away and make that future feel so much more accomplishable.
Yeah, it's not this big, huge thing that they have to try to overcome. They're taking steps by steps to get there.
Definitely. And it feels, as if it isn't so insurmountable. So that, and you can also track your progress and you can hold yourself accountable. This is one of the things that in the book that we talk about, I'm not saying this isn't work. Again, as I joked, I am a professor, and in the book there are workbooks and there's work. You got to take out your pen and your pencil and start writing some stuff down, but it helps you to hold yourself accountable. Again, not to be hard on yourself, but to say, okay, am I making that progress that I want to make? But then also, as you've reached out and talked to your people who are on your team and maybe these experts, and you've told them that future, they can also hold you accountable. They can say, oh, hey, how's that going? And what's going on? And it allows you to really track your progress around how things are going, because it doesn't happen overnight. And it does take some work, but it is work that we can all do.
Well, of course they're going to get work. You're a professor, right? Homework. But you know what? It's doable. All of this is really doable for people, where they can take these steps and really make changes and not feel so bleak about a future. Because I think right now, and maybe I'm wrong, but it just feels like more people are not really, don't have really positive thoughts about what their future can be. And there's so many possibilities.
Well, definitely, Marianne, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, we should, recognize that, that the time that we're in, that it has been an incredibly tough year for everybody all over the world, and these times make us feel like we don't have any power. And there's actually a part in this, I should say, I finished the book in 2019, but in it there is a whole chapter on existential threats, big threats, writing about things like war and famine, and yes, plagues and sickness. And saying, okay, well, how do you deal with that? Like, what are the steps that you can take to start feeling your own power, that you can actually start shaping your future in the face of things that you don't have control over, right? You can't stop by yourself. You can't stop a global pandemic by yourself. You can't stop a global recession, but you can take stock of what you do have control over. And one of the things I did in that section was to be able to go out to other futurists. And in the book, I go and talk to a lot of experts, because that's really so much of what I do. I don't know everything, but I do know a lot of people. And so I go to those people and ask those questions, to go with humility and say, I'm trying to figure out this one problem. How would you figure out this problem? And I really wanted to say to these futurists, here are some people who, are dealing with something that is, larger than them. And oftentimes, larger than their family and larger than their community. What advice would you give them? And for many people, we went out and really talked to them and said, okay, let's make sure we can give people pragmatic advice to say, okay, as a futurist who has dealt with these existential threats of death or existential threats of violence, what can you do to find that power and then start taking steps to make your life better? And that was one of the parts I think that I'm most proud of, because even in the early stages and even some of the early feedback that I've gotten from people, that they've found strength in that. They actually found a place where they could start to feel a little bit better and then start to take those early steps, because that's the hardest part. Those first steps are the hardest. And I like to tell people is that when you are frightened and it does feel hard, it means you're doing the right thing. It means that your future is really close. That if you feel really comfortable and things like that, and that's great if you're happy and you're on the path of that future that you want. But if you want to make a change, as we said, it's going to take a little work. And when it does feel hard and you do feel discouraged, if you can flip that script in your brain and understand that means you're doing the right thing. That means that you're actually going in the right direction.
Well, I think it's also encouraging for people to hear that you don't have all the answers, and at the same time, you're going to other experts like yourself and reaching out to them and talking with them about possibilities, which it seems that it gives people hope that, they don't need to know everything. It's a process.
Definitely. And that's it. And that's what I teach my students. So if you had come and you took my courses, and we teach my students to, when you approach this type of thinking, you do it from a place of humility, understanding. And that's really what these last 25 years of being a futurist, I generally do 10 years out, Marianne. So I've seen the futures happen. So I've actually designed things and seen them happen. Seen when I was at the Intel Corporation, seen billions of microprocessors that we helped to make. And what I felt from that was this sense of humility that, wow, this really has an effect. And so that's what I teach my students is you come to this from a point of saying, you not only don't know everything, you can't know everything, and that's okay. But what you're going to need is you're going to need other people. I can't stress that enough. I mean, I've often been rightly called out as a technological futurist who cares more about people than about technology. I care more an understanding that the future is built by people, and people are so incredibly important, and the relationships and the stories that we tell and how we help each other is so incredibly important. Not only our friends and our family, but our community and everybody around us. And I think we've all really learned that over the past year as well. Is that is so important, is to take that step forward and go, I don't know everything, but here's what I think. And then to hear what other people think about it as well. That I think really, really helps you. And oftentimes will really encourage people to help you. That is a sort of a proven thing that we talk about in the book, is that coming from a place of humility and a place of being a little vulnerable, of saying, this is what I'm thinking, but I don't know everything. You'll really be surprised how people can step up and really, really want to help.
Do you feel that this is almost like a life skill that they should be teaching in high school? Because it seems that it fosters so much innovation and possibilities when people look at life this way.
Well, I am a little biased here, being a futurist, but yes, I couldn't agree more. I think everybody should think like a futurist. I really do, because it is that skill. It works in your personal life, oftentimes, and really what brought me to this book and this project was I would go and I tell a few of these stories in the book where, I spend most of my life working with large corporations and, working with CEOs. And one of the things that they'll do is I'll go and I'll be working with them, and then they get some private time with me, right? So they get to sit down and have sort of an open conversation off the record with a futurist. And there was one very powerful CEO that I sat down with, and it was just the two of us. And they turned to me, and the only thing they wanted to talk about were their kids. It wasn't about business, wasn't about the stock market, wasn't about anything like that. They just wanted to talk about their kids. And that to me is so centering, because I realized that, this person wanted to know about really something, these kids that they cared about more than themselves, right? Anybody who has kids knows that. And so that to me, again, is incredibly humbling to say, okay, what can we do here? And so much of the conversations that I have with people are about how do we make sure that the next generation is taking the steps and that they feel empowered. And so, yeah, that's definitely one of the things. And even some of the early feedback that I've gotten is, how do we teach this to the young kids? How do we get those young minds thinking like futurists? Because they're really the ones who are going to build the future.
Yeah, I think this would be such a great life skill for someone to learn and take with them. Because, I mean, think about all the possibilities that can happen then. Here I'm preaching to the choir. If you have all these young people thinking the way a futurist does.
And that's why I spend so much time, Marianne, at schools. So, when we aren't in a global pandemic, I, spend a lot of time with K through 12 schools, talking to young kids, really getting them, talking to like 10-year-olds around the future. Granted, it's very short and it's quick and I tell a lot of jokes, but trying to really get them to understand that they really do have that power, because oftentimes they're not told that. And a lot of the writing that I do in the outreach and the advocacy is really getting these young minds to feel that and understand that, but understand that we need them, that honestly the future needs them, and that we need them sometimes more than they need us. And when you see that empowerment with them, they really start making different decisions. And kids are great. So kids say crazy stuff. So it's so much fun. So then we'll very quickly go from having conversations around building the future. And then of course they want to know, they'll be science fiction nerds, so they want to know how to build a Death Star. And because I'm a futurist, I start telling them about physics and things like that. So they get very excited about what they might be able to do in the future.
So you're giving them the Death Star plans, is what it sounds like.
Well, the teacher loved it. So the longer story, so it was a bunch of 10-year-old boys. And 10-year-old boys, if you've ever been around them, are not built to sit still. And I know that, I once was a 10-year-old boy a very long time ago. And they were just squiggling around. And all of a sudden they asked, hey, BDJ, how do you build a Death Star? And so I started to tell them, and we started asking them, and the teacher pulled me aside at the end because I started talking about physics and mass and gravity and building a planet-sized weapon and all the stuff that you would find in Star Wars. And the teacher was amazed because they all took out their notebooks and started taking notes. So yeah, it's it can be pretty powerful talking about the future.
I'm sure we'll see them with NASA before we know it, right?
Yeah, we hope.
At least in your classroom. Well, and I know we've covered quite a bit. So for our listeners that are today going, gosh, okay, this sounds amazing. What are some of the questions I should be asking myself right now to think like a futurist?
Well, the first step is to say, who is that future you? And to really sit down and start writing it down. To say, what does it look like? And we've even joked. So there's some jokes in the book. So we try to also have some fun where, there was one person I was working with in the book where I had said, well, what do you want in the future? It's the hardest question to answer. And she didn't know. She just didn't know what she wanted. And I said, well, do you want to be rich? And she kind of paused and looked at me like I was crazy and said, well, yeah. I said, awesome. Okay, great. What kind of rich do you want to be? And no one had ever asked her that before. And I said, okay, do you want to be yacht rich? What do you mean yacht rich? I said, do you want a yacht? Do you want to have so much money that you have a yacht and you have a crew and you have all this? She goes, oh gosh, no, I don't want to be yacht rich. I was like, no, me neither. Who wants that? Sounds like such a burden. And she looks at me and I said, okay, do you want to be mansion rich? And she kind of said, I said, do you want a mansion? Do you want a staff? Do you want butlers and maids? And I said, oh gosh, no, that would be terrible. I wouldn't know what to do. And so it really got specific. And I think this is, again, as you start thinking about that, I think the questions that we ask ourselves is to get really specific around what you want that future to be. And then figuring out who the people are that you're going to go talk to. That's I think the hardest step and the most scary step. But once you start doing that, you start to create momentum. And that momentum will really carry you forward.
Well, you have so many great examples in your book, The Future You. I think it gives people a really good starting place on how to start thinking like a futurist and looking at life in a new way. My goodness, Brian, we can talk all day. I just loved your book. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Well, probably the best place to find me is on Twitter, and I'm at BDJ Futurist, all one word. So it's at BDJ Futurist, and that's where I usually try to put most of the speaking and the writing and anything that I do. I kind of put there. So that's usually the best place to find me.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, Marianne, thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you, Brian. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Future You, Breaking Through the Fear and Build the Life You Want. The Future You's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.